Here we are in the third installment of the Imperium series. You had Imperium Classics, Imperium Legends, and now you have Imperium Horizons. Today we're going to be looking at this game from the perspective of someone who is new to this, someone who has the previous boxes, people who are on the fence. I asked for your questions on social media. You gave me some answers. I'm going to try to squeeze all that into this review. Let's dig in. Let's just start off with what the Imperium series is. It's an asymmetrical card game where you're going to be playing as different nations, developing your deck over time. It is a deck builder because you're going to be getting cards from a communal area, but at the same time, you're going to be gathering cards as you have to reshuffle your cards and developing your deck. You'll eventually get to a development stage and you're going to be scoring points by taking actions. That's really the run of the game. And if you want to know, it is a medium to heavy game. Don't let anybody tell you it's light. The lighter factions are easier to get into, but the actual gameplay experience can be a lot more heavy, and you may have seen that consistently throughout the series at this point. But inside of this box is a big box. It's got a bigger section, a bigger tray for 14 factions. It's got a whole bunch more tokens. It's got some cards that are made for balancing other decks. So this is one of the things. There were some balance issues. They worked it out. They put this inside of the packaging for this one. It's a little thick deck here. As a matter of fact, I think I got it right here. It's got it for some previous stuff. So if you need those, they're in here. They're not sold separately from what I know. And I don't like that. I got to buy a box just to get that. Not the move. They even have separate solo cards. I got these solo cards here. They have the solo cards for each one of them. This used to be an issue with the other one. You have to go flip through a book to look through the certain things, and it just rules overall. We'll get to the rules in a minute. But there's a storage solution. The solution doesn't hold all the stuff. I do have a picture that I found that someone somehow pulled that all off by just creating deck boxes and stuff like that. There's a lot of issues that I have with this insert, but mainly they did a really good job of putting the little sections at the bottom to say, hey, this is where this deck goes. Thumbs up. Would have been better if it just had dividers. I mean, come on, like dividers would have been easy so I can see what I'm pulling out versus when I try to sleeve my cards, which this is the super tightest fit with sleeve cards. Super tight. I mean, very, very tight. As a matter of fact, I think I bent my cards because they're so tight. But whatever, it's super tight. So when you want to think about sleeving, you may want to consider taking this insert out. It's not terrible. It's better. It's just not great. That's all I can tell you. That's what's physically inside of there. Now, the rule book is another thing. That was a major issue, and it's been improved. They've added a lot of upfront information. So they've told you a little bit more about the concepts of the game, the history of the game, things that they're even apologizing for up front. I'm not even going to get into that, but it's really about the historical impact and how these different factions and groups of people interact with the game, because they are shooting for this thematic experience with each deck. And some of that will exist. We'll talk about that later. But they talk about that in the rule book. They kind of give you the general structure. What happened before was there was a terrible flow to the rule book before. This book cures most of that. It's going to tell you how to play the game. It actually shows you physical examples of a turn. If you're playing solo, it shows you examples of a turn. And it's bigger. The book is bigger, so you can see more pictures. But there's like this weird breakup in the middle. It's a weird breakup in the middle when it's talking about shortening the game and changes that you can make to the game. And it's got a little bit about solo mode in there, weirdly in the middle. It's just strange. It's really, really strange. I don't know. But they also cured the problem with all the keywords and things like that. They put it in the back. It makes more sense to be in the back. It doesn't break up the flow, for me at least. And the rule book is generally improved. It's not a mess. As a matter of fact, someone had commented that in later editions, they kind of got the rule book together eventually. I wasn't there for that. I got the first edition and it hurt bad. All right, so that's what's inside the box. All I can tell you is the storage solution. You don't have to look elsewhere to put all them decks in that big box. At least the box is big enough where you can probably squeeze it in if you got all the deck boxes. Anyway, that's not my job. I would have liked a storage solution. Should have been a big box, big enough to put everything in there, but I understand choices have to be made. Before we move forward into the gameplay section, I want you to know it's going to be split. So if you want to just know about the trades expansion, I'll touch on that a little bit later. But if you don't know what goes on in Imperium Classics, go ahead and just take a look at this next section. Remember, timestamps are going to be below. Now, when we dig into gameplay, everything changes just based on your faction. Everybody has different goals. Now, some of the factions, I'm just going to give you one that's real easy, like the Japanese, and one that's really hard, like cultists. They do a really good job in this game of explaining, like, hey, this one's difficult, this one's easy. They have a star system. And if you buy Horizons, it's going to have like a kind of an informational chart about each one of the decks and also how it plays solo. I think that's a really smart choice because it lets people know what to get into. I was able to give a deck to someone who hadn't played in a while, and that helped them get through the rules and get back acclimated. And then somebody who was playing with me also played a little bit more of an advanced deck because they had played and they remember the strategy behind it. I took on the hardest one, the cultist. So, it's just crazy. You can play something that's super involved with multiple decks, multiple things going on, or you can have someone that's just as easy trying to get resources, moving things on there. But the general beat of the game is like this. You're going to have your own nation deck. And what you're doing is you're going to have a hand of 5 cards. The cards are going to have a goal or an ability that they're trying to achieve to create an engine for them. So this is a tableau building game. You're building a deck, trying to get things out. Now, in the middle of the board, they'll have a different types of cards. They have region cards, which are kind of like resource and icon gathering places. They'll have uncivilized cards, which can interact with opponents, or they just give you a different abilities, so how you use your actions. You'll be adding those to your deck. You have I think they're called Triumph. Those are blue cards. Those are really nicely powerful cards that help you develop faster, get more resources. And when you do that, you're taking those cards into your hand and you're trying to get them to play out. See, when you have your turn, you have 3 choices. You can activate cards, playing the cards, exhausting cards as well. And then you have your innovate turn, which you can just get rid of all your cards and break through and grab a card. Now, when I say break through and acquire, now we're going to be digging into the weeds, and I don't want to do that because there are so many keywords and terms in this game. It will blow your mind, okay? So I'm just going to say the words, and I'll have some pictures and show you a little bit of animation to get an idea, just so you know. So you're going to be acquiring and breaking through those cards. Now, one of the interesting things about this game is as you're developing this deck, trying to be thematic to the cards that are telling you, hey, take this mask card, discard a card, exhaust this to put a different mask card from a different deck in your hand, or take this here to take these progression pieces, add them to your main card so that you can develop this other thing and move forward in the ritual. There's so many things that could happen in this game based on what's inside of your deck and the cards that you're going to get out of that main area. One of the other things you can do is just cause unrest. So there's another parts of this game where it's called unrest. It's these cards that kind of fill up your hand, they fill up your deck, and they also are an in-game trigger. There's so many different ways to trigger the end of this game. It's crazy. There's a lot of things I'm kind of glossing over here, but one of the ways you can do that is unrest, because some, let's say like the Vikings or barbarians and things of that nature, those are going to be types of factions that are going to go for disruption. They're going to stay an empire. They don't want, they're going to stay barbarians, and there's a barbarian state and an empire state. That's when you can acquire different types of cards and you can acquire different types of cards, but you also can use the cards based on where you're at. So you have all these different things that kind of play into the theme of the decks, and one of those is unrest, and that's it's an action that gets rid of all those negative cards in your hand. So there's a variety of things you can do, play actions, or you can just instead to get rid of your cards to get a specific card, or you can get rid of all your negative unrest cards. You are still trying to score points, or you're trying to reach an in-game thing. So there are some factions that are like the cultists who are just trying to end the game. They are trying to complete a ritual throughout the game, get to that point, get some things done, and then when they get it done, they could end the game with that state. All right, so they can end the game. There are other cards, and there's just different ways to get through your decks. But ultimately, there are different ways to score points in this game, and you're going to be putting things in your tableau so that you can exhaust them and activate them too. There's even ways to tuck cards, they're called garrison, to tuck cards away so that you can get to, maybe thin out your deck so you can get through more development. And mostly everybody faction has a development deck. Some people, nation deck, and they're going to be going through those, adding these more powerful cards to kind of represent the progression of their culture as they go along. I mean, there's so many different ways this goes about. Some people don't even have that. Some people start in a barbarian state and they stay there. Some people start, it's crazy. There's a lot of different things going on, and I'd rather just not go for that far. I think I'm going too far already anyway. But that's basically what you're doing. There is some interaction. There are cards that are more aggressive, and there are factions that play into that. They will affect other people, but it's not overly aggressive unless you kind of agree upon it and you have that in the game. As a matter of fact, when we get into the trade, that's going to be removed from the game. So some of that's going to be removed from the game. I think that's all you need to know. You're going to be playing through this until end-game conditions hit, and there's several. I'm just not going to get too deep into that. You're going to go score points, and some of those are found by putting cards under your main card for history. Some of those will be found in your tableau. Some of them will be from your hand and discard pile and things of that nature. There are also these development cards at the end that give you specific points, and then there's also some I believe they call fame cards, purple cards, that give you even more powerful ways to score points. It is a very, very AP-driven game, and not in a bad way, but it definitely is one of those types of games. If you're playing at higher player counts, like 3 and 4, you're going to have some long play times. So that's something that you definitely need to know. People can get in their own head. They may not understand the factions, but thankfully the rulebook is slightly better at helping you through these things. All right, let's get into the actual module that's being added, and that is the trade module. So let's dig into this trade module. So this is for people who are looking for a little bit more advanced experience. Honestly, I do feel like it's a more advanced thing because you're going to be interacting with players in a different way, not in a combat way. As a matter of fact, those are stripped out. And some of these trade cards are hidden under the trade decks, and some of them are shuffled into the Big Nation deck, things of that nature. So I'm sorry if I'm misusing all these terms. Sometimes it's just there's a lot of keywords in your head here for the game. But you're going to have this new module, and 6 out of the 14 decks must be used with the trade expansion module. That we'll address later. But what's going on in this? So you're basically going to have a new thing called goods. Okay, so these goods you're going to be using on your cards during the trade action. And with the trade action, you'll have cards that have commerce on them. You'll put a token on there and you'll save those. And what'll happen is these cards will interact, and as you accumulate them on there, you can turn them in. If you have up to 3, a total of 3, you can turn them in for profit. And that has a profit action, points, different benefits, things of that nature. But you can also activate another player's cards. So you can actually put one on their cards so they don't have 3, and you can get their benefit as well. You get a benefit, so it kind of simulates a trade between two people. So that's a really interesting element. You know, you're taking a good, you're activating that person's benefit, and then you get something back in return. It's a really interesting kind of dynamic. It takes a little getting used to, and I should say this. I should have said this in another section. This is a really kind of hands-off game unless you're playing some very aggressive factions or you're going for very aggressive cards. It feels different to have someone interact with you in sort of a positive way, sort of. It's kind of like an even exchange because those tokens can be added to your area, so that kind of helps you get closer to the profit. And since some of these factions are made for markets, okay, so they're made for that expansion, they're made for this expansion, they do feel a little bit more like highly thematic that way with the trading and the movement of how they gather resources and things of that nature. So that does lead more into the thematic experience of what Imperium Horizons and Imperium as a whole has been trying to do over this time. But that's really all there is to it. Now, do you need to care about this? I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't like being forced to do this, okay? I play with 2 factions. I played with 2 factions. People had different factions that were made for this module, and then I tried the cultists with it, and I didn't care. I didn't care. So I thought that was really interesting. Maybe it was just that faction that's so hard and so focused. I think that's the hardest deck in the game, honestly. But in the whole series. But I felt like I wasn't paying attention, and maybe other factions will use that. Maybe I was missing out on a benefit because you even get an extra card that kind of represents merchants, and you can flip it back and forth, so you can get better benefits out of it. So it even adds another element with that. So you don't just have your cards that have a history under them. You also have this other, merchant card. So that's really interesting, an interesting element. But overall, I'm a little worried as I would explore more decks. I definitely didn't want to play it in solo mode. I have no interest in playing in solo mode. I probably should give it more of a chance there. But I feel like it is a very interactive thing, and I'm not sure if you want to have Imperium series be more interactive for you, or a little bit more hands-off so you can attain the goals that you're trying to reach and just have a competitive experience of how you get cards and things of that nature. It's something I'm gonna leave up to you, but for me, I was like, I want to test this with a different faction and see if I even care. Meanwhile, the other characters, let's call them characters. Shout out to my boy Scott, my boy John. The other players were, they were really using each other a little bit more. So it definitely, I felt what it was working with. It's just that I was kind of, what I was worried about the most actually happened was I didn't feel the interaction sitch. I just didn't feel the interaction I wanted to, or the need to do the participation of that module. That's how I feel. All right, so I'm gonna get into the review portion here. We're just gonna start with some of the negatives here. It starts with opening that box and looking at the storage solution. Do you care that you can sleeve, but it's gonna be extra, extra tight? The organization was a good attempt, but it was still sort of a miss because I need to have tabs where I can see the factions. Otherwise, when I sleeve my cards, I can't see below it. I've always thought the organization was okay. This one's slightly better. It's got some spots for your tokens. I just didn't think it was great. Then we move on to the rules. The rules were a lot better, but that middle section there, that kind of threw the flow off, the practice thing, whatever. And by the way, I should mention that practice mode is a really cool idea. We'll get to that a little bit later. But there are some things in there that just kind of threw me off a little bit. But that's that. Gameplay-wise, I think the new module is relevant, but I'm a little on it. I'm just kind of. The reason is because I don't know how the other factions are going to interact with that don't use that module. I just didn't play enough of it with other factions that don't need to be trading, whatever, and they can use it. I'm not sure, but I did see some good interaction on that. The game is long. If you play it at high player counts, it's always going to be super long. And if you're learning, the onboarding process can take forever. Even if someone kind of knows everything, it's still going to take a long time. And everybody's doing their own asymmetric thing. Might be a little too AP driven. Might be. Sometimes even when I'm playing, I'm like, this is too long. And thankfully, they do have a way to shorten it a little bit. And they do have practice modes if you do want to learn the decks and prepare for game night. That's something that you have an option of doing. But I definitely want to warn you that higher player count is probably not the best move for this game, even for veterans of this game. So that's a thing. Just trying to think of other things that I know without a doubt that would be points that bother me, but also may bother you. No, I think that's it. And I think some of the factions, once again, maybe out of ignorance and not knowing the cultures, could be hard to digest thematically because you don't know what the theme is. You don't know what's going on. And it's not our job to go do all the research. Although they do a decent job of explaining it, when you start playing it out, you may not feel the theme of what's going on there. That happens. That's happened in other stuff in other boxes. But then we get to the positives. The thing is, the game is so good mechanically, so great mechanically. What you're the gameplay process is so great. It's a great card game. It's just, you got to get past the initial difficulty of the experience. You just do. You play it once, you may not be able to bear through it, right? Like playing Root for the first time. You may not get it. Spirit Island, you may not get it because the faction that you play just didn't appeal to the type of gamer you are. This will be the same thing with this experience. You got keywords that you need to know. Then you say, I like that deck, I'm trying another one. Well, you got some new stuff you got to pay attention to in this one. So think about that. maybe too much for you. This weight is up there, 3.5 or higher, I'm assuming. I haven't looked at BGG for this one. I just know it's up there, for me at least. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And just overall value, I don't like that I have to use the module just for just to play with 6 of the decks. I have to. I just think about that point over and over again. I'm not thinking about how many times I may have said that, but I just don't like that idea, because that basically puts you down to 8 decks out of the 8 decks out of the 14, and that doesn't necessarily help the value of the box, right? Not for me. Like, I didn't even pay for it, and I still feel like, damn, like that's not the whole thing, right? Doesn't feel like I get the whole thing, actually, right? So with that being said, I still feel like this is a great game. It is one of my favorite card games of all time. It is right up there with some of the highest, because it gives me, and I'll say it just like this, as someone who plays solo, this is the ultimate, okay? Someone who plays at lower player counts too, this would be the ultimate for you. I find it at 1 and 2, it's just perfection. Okay, it's just perfection. It works so well. It excels the design at 2-player and 1-player, because you're playing against a solo bot. Very easy upkeep, understanding with the cards in the system as well. That's how I feel. If I was giving this game a rating, right, when you want to know, out of 10, I'm going to give it an 8. There's just still some things that are holding it up. This Horizons box that's holding it up. And I would just suggest, if you were going into this Imperium Horizons, you would go with maybe the smaller box, Classics. See if you can get on that, get on board with it, understand the lingo, things of that nature. And then you go, hey, I'm feeling this. Go to the Horizons box. It's great. You can go to Legends box later. I mean, I don't know what your training wheels are, or if you just want to go big. There's enough factions in there that are on the lower end and take you all the way up. It's just that I'm trying to warn you a little bit here. I'm trying not to be all like, hey, go get that, go get that. I think the game is great. It's just that, like, it's really hard for me to recommend the big box first. It just feels like a shout out to the us being the people who have owned it and love it. So with that being said, hopefully I answered most of your questions. Hopefully you had a good time watching this content. Let me know in the comments below, man. Just let me know how you feel. Let me know what's up. The review style, things we're doing, just talking, having conversation. All right, folks, you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me on MVM.